Hello Internet, in this video we are going to be looking into WPF, which is one of the classic user interface design languages or frameworks for Windows. So it was created, I believe, for Windows Vista, and it's been pretty much the main thing that everything is written in. Visual Studio itself is actually written in a fork of WPF, and a lot of other things have their roots in this framework. So Silverlight, if you remember that, the Universal Windows Platform, and everything that's come since has largely used this XAML markdown, which is kind of core to what WPF does. And even though the Universal Windows Platform has kind of come as the new thing that's kind of taking it down, this is still widely used and it works everywhere. So you can use this pretty much anywhere you want. So you can use this on Windows 7 or Vista if people still use that. And that's something you can't do with Universal Windows Platform. And it's actually probably one of my favorite designed frameworks. The way you actually work with it is really nice. There's some kinks to it, but for the most part, it's actually really nice. So yeah, we're going to get into it and we'll see what happens. So I have just created a completely basic WPF project here. This is what you get if you do a basic new WPF project in C#. You'll get an app, which has the app.xaml and the app.xaml.cs file. So the xaml.cs file has what's called the code behind. This is identical to the Universal Windows Platform. And then the app.xaml is going to just have this code here. This, for the most part, you don't really need to worry about. You can store some resources here, but the app itself is actually only exists as sort of an initialization point. This is sort of the startup point for your app, for your application. The main part, what you were actually seeing, was this main window, and that is all happening here. So again, we have a code behind file, which is this xaml.cs, and then we have this normal XAML thing, and you'll see here we actually get a design window. I kind of moved the properties file behind the camera, but if I actually bring that out quick, you can kind of see what that has. So this is actually pretty useful when working with WPF. You can actually edit pretty much anything you need here. So we can change like our background to red or whatever. I tend not to use it just because I prefer coding. And so I kind of hid the properties there so I don't actually do anything important over the camera. People have been complaining about me doing things behind the camera, and the way I bring these videos together, I can't move it in post, and I probably wouldn't remember anyway. So yeah, hopefully things are better. Anyway. This is the default thing you're going to get. I don't want to move that. You will get a window, which is going to be the outer portion. So everything in Windows is in a window. And so this actually defines that window. So we can have an initial height and a width, and also a title. So we're going to create a task editor. So I'm just going to call it Taskit. And you'll see up here, Taskit is actually added there. So I can actually go and start this again. And now our window actually says Taskit instead of main window or whatever it said. And so that's how easy it is to edit these things. If you've worked with any modern framework, it's pretty much that easy. The real power of WPF and everything that's come after it is the data binding that you get, which actually allows you to bind. It allows you to bind your data objects from behind your code actually into your UI elements. So you can design your UI here and have your code behind actually define what the data looks like and get them both to play together. And that actually becomes really powerful. So everything by default is in a grid. There's a few different ways to lay things out. A grid is just what you think. By default, it's 1 by 1. So there's no interesting things happening here. So effectively, it's just a blank place that you can put things. There's also a canvas, which you would use to like draw random objects. A canvas kind of lets you position things anywhere inside of it, whereas a grid is usually designed for grid layouts. So if you need a table or anything that would be in columns or something like that, you'd use a grid. And then there's also a stack panel, which can go either horizontally or vertically, and you'd use those for a list. So we're going to keep it to a grid, and I'm actually just going to add 3 rows to this grid. So we're going to do some row definitions here. And you'll notice, so I did grid.row definitions, so I can actually just access properties inside of this object. These are actually C# objects. You could, if I hover over them, you can actually see what class we're accessing. It's system.windows.controls.grid. You can actually go and look at that class, see everything it has. There's functions behind and everything, so you can go and check that out. Anyway. Sorry if my voice is a little bit hoarse. I have been feeling awful lately, and my voice just came back. That's why there haven't been videos, is because talking has been painful. Anyway, row definitions. All we need to do here is add a row definition with a height. So there's actually a height, a min height, and a max height that we can add. I'm just going to work with heights here. So by default, let's just do, I'm going to actually type auto here. We should be able to do all 3 different types. So there's 3 ways to lay things out here. You have auto, you have a star, which will take up the rest of your layout. And then you have a specific pixel amount, so like 64, for example, which will allocate 64 device pixels at the bottom of your screen. So one of the cool things with WPF is it's one of the first frameworks that actually supports window scaling. You may notice this if you get like a high DPI computer, like any modern laptop, for example. You'll notice that if you go into like the magnification, the screen settings, that it's set to like 200% to render everything bigger. And then if you use a really old program, everything looks super tiny. They actually fixed that lately, but the reason that was happening is because WPF was the first thing to actually support that scaling. It supports these device pixels, which are device independent, compared to just normal pixels, which change with the screen density. So if you have a more dense screen, things will just appear smaller if you just use pixels, which isn't necessarily a good thing. So we can use 64 here. That gives us 64 on the bottom. And then we have this 1 star, which is just going to take up the rest because this top row is an auto row, which means it's going to allocate as much space as it needs to fill whatever elements are there. So as an example, if I just want to stick some text in there with a text block, which is just a basic way to draw text, I can just say task it, and that will just be our basic thing. You'll see that we now have a basic thing showing up here. So we actually have that first column showing up, or first row showing up. And you can see it's labeled as auto here. I should scroll in. I don't know if this will help, but yeah. It's hard to do scaling. I should figure out how to use the zoom tool more effectively. But you can see this is here, and now that actual column shows up. And then we have this 1 star, which is taking up the rest. That's where our list is going to go. And then at the bottom is where we're going to put a text box to actually add things. So we'll just call this task it task manager. And then let's do a grid on the bottom. So I'm going to do a grid inside of our grid. There's better ways to do this, but this way we can actually kind of demonstrate some of this stuff. So to place something in a grid, you just give it the grid.row that it's supposed to be in. This works for any element. So if I want to move this guy down, I can just do a grid. Oops, that's not going to work. Grid row equals 1. And it should, I moved it down and then the auto moved back up. So this entire row now takes up the entire thing again. So that was a bad example, but Anyway, it works with anything. It doesn't just work with grids. So you can attach these properties to anything and it will just work. So we wanted that, and we were going to have some grid column definitions. So columns are obviously the opposite of rows. They're vertical. So column definition, we're going to do a width here. And I'm going to say this is going to be the text box, and then we're going to have a button that's next to it that's going to be for submitting it. So this will just be our star. And then we'll have the other one have a width equal to star as well. And I will get to that in a bit, with a minimum width of, does that work? No, I didn't think so. Okay, so we have to specify an actual minimum width, which will mean it can't get any smaller than this. So if we resize this thing, it won't get any smaller. So I'm just going to say 80 for now, which might be a bit big, but that's fine. And then I'm going to do like 4 star. So what this means is this is actually a factor. So these stars are added up, and effectively we've now divided these columns into 5 columns. And we've allocated 4 of them for this first one. So this first one is 4 times the size of this other one, unless this one gets smaller than 80 pixels, in which case this says, no, I need 80 pixels, and it takes it, and then this one gets the rest of it. So that kind of lets you play around with that. Everything so far, everything we've been working with, is available in the Universal Windows platform too. So if you're working with that, this all works. There's nothing here is actually different there. It's all the same, which is handy. They've gone through like 6 different iterations now, and it's all still the same, which is good and bad, I guess. So the final thing we're going to want is an items control, I think. So there's a few different ways to display lists of things. An items control will do that. And effectively, that's just going to make a list of things. So grid.row, set that to 1. So this will be in the middle bit. And there's obviously nothing here. So just for testing, I'm gonna copy and paste twice. And you'll see that those 2 tasket things got stacked on top of one another, because this items control is actually doing a bunch of stuff. And one of the things it's doing is there's actually this layout. That's not it. Hold on. So I haven't actually worked with WPF in a while. I got frustrated with a few different things. There is an items panel. There we go. And so this items panel template by default is a stack panel, which gets you this layered list. We can also do a few other things. Stack panel is pretty much the one we want. There isn't really any other that I would want to use in this case, but we could, for example, if we were, I don't know, wanting to be evil to our users, we could make it horizontal. So everything goes horizontally across the page. We won't do that, but by default, everything is already in this stack panel. This is the default. We can keep it there because it's not anything different, but underneath the hood, that's what it's doing. And so actually, I think it's using a virtualizing stack panel, which is slightly different. The only difference here is that a virtualizing stack panel doesn't draw things that aren't on the screen. So if you have like a list of, say, 100,000 elements, if you did that in a normal stack panel, it would try to draw all 100,000 elements, which takes ages. But if you use a virtualizing stack panel, if it knows the height of the thing, you can actually scroll through it and it will figure out what would be on screen and then draw that, and everything else gets culled. And because of that, it saves you a lot of time, and your users like you. So I think this is the default behavior. I don't know which one is actually true, but that's fine. This will work for what we need. So the other thing that I want to do now is we've created two things in our list. This isn't really the best way to do this. What you want to do is use an items control.item template. And this is going to be the template for the items that you're displaying. So right now we had those two items there. But I want to actually have a... Ooh, what am I doing? Data template. There we go. So a data template is going to represent a way to render the data that is passed into this object. So I was talking about data binding earlier, and what this actually allows you to do is bind your data to an object. So effectively we can take like a list or an array or something and say, I want this items control to draw that array. And when you do, you could like manually say, add this to draw, or you could actually attach it here and actually do two-way binding, which means any changes that happen to any of the elements here get reflected back onto your list. And if you change the list, this actually gets updated to reflect that. So there's a few things that you have to do to actually get that to work. But this actually is pretty neat. So we're just going to add a text block here, and I'm going to say text equals task. So we have a list of tasks, which is crappy, but whatever. And then just to kind of show that, there is this items source here, which effectively is how you would bind these things to it. And you'll see it's saying it expects an IEnumerable. One of the crappy ways to do this is actually just type some random string. A string is actually an enumerable type because it's just an array of characters. It really, really doesn't like this at all. And this totally breaks. But if you start this, like I see invalid markup. If you start this though, you'll see we do get all of these tasks. And this is actually getting cut off because we don't have a way to scroll yet. But I can expand that or whatever, and everything does what we need. So that works. I don't recommend it because it totally breaks this markup thing, which is kind of handy to see what you're doing. But that's sort of how that works, is you can actually display a list of all identical items just by binding to them. We'll actually show how to do that shortly. So last thing, before we actually get into like some code, I'm going to add a text box down here. And this is just going to be for the task you want to add. I think I'm going to change this to auto, just because that is a bit obnoxious. And then we're going to also add a button with grid column equal to 1. So we'll put it in that column over here. And that should be good. Let's give it some content so we can actually display add task. And so when you click this button, we can grab this text here and insert it into this list. And that's really all that remains for us to do. There's not much to do. So the easy way to do this, not the right way, but the easy way, is to actually name these things. So we can call this like our list. And if I do that, you'll notice this text or this code behind file is a partial class. And so C# partial classes are sort of classes that aren't quite complete. And the reason they exist is sort of for what's happening here in WPF. This XAML during compilation actually generates a second class file that is also for the main window, which includes a bunch of other things. So it actually includes references to all of these controls. If you don't name them, they are given random names and you can't really access them. But if you do name them, then you can do something like list and do anything you wanted. So we could item source this equal to something like that. And that should still work. so we should get a bunch of elements again. And we do. And so you can kind of reference things that way, and that works. There's no reason you can't do that. It just gets really painful as you start working with this more and more. It gets really painful to actually maintain that because you have to keeping your backend and your front end in sync takes a lot of work, and there's not really a good way to do it. So WPF uses what's called the model view controller design pattern. So effectively how that works is you have a view here. This is your view. Obviously, it's what you see. Your controller is sort of back here. So that's sort of this. Not really. I wouldn't really call it that. And then you have your views, or your view models, or your models. Sorry. Totally lost my train of thought there. So view models and models are sort of different. I like to think of the models as sort of, it's what you act on, if that makes any sense. So in larger applications, I'll separate those out. So the models will be everything that I work on, and then the view models will be what I expose outside of my backend. So if I'm going to view, if somebody's going to view that, or if I'm going to send that across to some other application, that's a view model. That's something somebody else is viewing. And then if you just have a model, if you're working inside of it and you're sort of trying to represent some sort of data. So we just need a view model here. So I'm going to create two, I think, if I'm thinking of this correctly. The first I'm going to do is just a TaskList view model. And this is going to store everything. When I say everything, I mean almost everything. But then we're also going to have a task view model. And so the task view model is just going to store information about our task. So I'm going to do public string name. We're actually going to do this and make these private. Sorry. There's another step here that I almost skipped. That you don't necessarily need to do it, but you should. So if I made these properties, I could expose them and I could access them, and I could still do all my binding. But I'd run into issues down the road. Actually, screw it. Hold on. We can demonstrate this, and then I can come back and fix it. And that way we can kind of move forward a little bit faster, and then come back and do the hard stuff at the end. So we're going to do a name and is complete. So we have this is complete name, or we can just say complete, I guess. So the complete is going to be true or false. It's going to be false if you haven't completed it, and true otherwise. The name is just going to be the name of the thing. And then we have our task list view model. So this is going to be a observable collection. Do I want to do that? Let's do, just for now, let's do a list of these task view models. So this won't work. I'm not going to say why, but keep in mind this isn't actually, you can do this, but it'll only work once, and I'll get to why in a bit. So this is going to be our tasks, and we're going to have two other things. We're going to need a string for the new task name. So I could put this in a separate class, but for just demonstration, it doesn't particularly matter. And then that should be it. That's all I need, I think. Yeah, there's nothing else. Do I want to do a command as well? We could, but I don't really want to. Yeah, we'll skip that for now. So we have these tasks, and we have a task name that we want to add into the tasks. Kind of thinking I want to, hold on. Sorry. Command. Sorry. There we go. So a command is, think of it as an abstract like action, something you do. And so this is just an interface here that says, can this thing execute and what are we executing? And so it's a basic way to say, I guess this is sort of what you want to do. And it kind of separates again out that model from the view from the controller. So your commands can kind of encompass sort of that control logic. They can kind of be what breaches between the user doing something and what your application just kind of does and shows to the user. So it kind of helps you wrap that user input. And there's a few other things you can do. Like with these, you should be able to do like key bindings if you want to do that kind of thing. There's a bunch of stuff. Anyway, got a little bit sidetracked. I wasn't intending to do these, but okay. Create task command. And so this is going to extend the I command. And we want this to be public again. And we'll implement that interface. So this is an event that's going to signal whether the ability to actually execute this task has changed or not. So you can actually use that by default if you like bind this command to a button, for example. It will actually disable the button if you say you can't execute it. We're not going to worry about that because that's more of a complex topic, but we're just going to say can always execute. So we don't have to really worry about that. And then we're going to try to take our parameter. Let's see if I remember how to do this. Parameter is task list view model. Did I do that right? Oh, I don't think I did that right. Maybe? Yes. Okay. So this is a C#7 thing. I don't know if this is going to compile or not, but it's sort of a shorthand of saying, if it's this, then do that and create a new variable that's equal to this. So effectively we're checking, is our parameter equal to this task list view model? And if it is, convert it to a task list view model and put it in this task list. That's how that reads. So this is only available in C#7, which came out a while ago. You need Visual Studio 2017 to use it. So yeah, that's the thing. I think this will work. I've never actually used that before, so we'll see. Let's see here. Now that we have that, I want to do a task list and take the tasks and add a new task view model with complete, or with the name equal to our task list dot task name and complete equal to false. And so we're just basically creating something and that's it. So that should be enough for us to actually use this thing. All I need to do is actually bind to this command. So we're going to have create task command with a get, which is going to return our create task command. For simplicity's sake, this probably isn't the best way to do this, but I'm actually going to just return a new create task command, which this should work just fine. It's just a little bit gross, just because every time you call this, you created something new, and that's sort of a side effect that nobody would expect. So in production, don't do that, but we're going to do it here because it's faster, and we're not really in the business of doing that kind of thing, making it look all nice. So, right. Now that we have that, I need this task list view model to be exposed here. So there's two ways to do that. The easy way is to do this dot DataContext and say this is equal to a new TaskList view model. And so what this would do is this would, since this main window is actually equal to this window, these are the same object. So this window is actually this class right here. What this is doing is setting the data context. So it's the context of data that's exposed. So when you're doing data bindings, this is the class that is actually on there. It's actually a stack, I believe. So everything above it in the stack, in the hierarchy, will be pushed onto it, and everything below will get popped off. So what that means is now that the data context is set there, I can take any of these properties and actually bind to them. So how that works is I take an item source and I do a binding equal to tasks. And so that's all you have to do to actually assign that. So that original item source where we were just entering a random string of characters and getting that list, now what I've said is I've said I want you to source that data from the bound tasks object, which is going to be this list here. And that's exactly what it's going to do. So all of that information is now going to be rendered here, and we can actually access that here. So since I have two things, let's actually grab that quick. So grid column, we're going to do two column definitions. Again, column definition with the width equal to star, and a column definition with the width equal to auto, and that'll just be for the check mark. So we can actually bind this equal to the name. So keep in mind, I said it was, like I said, it was a stack. So now this data template actually has the data context of the type of whatever object is bound here. So it will have, there will be a new one of these for each object in that list, and each one of them is going to have a unique data context relevant to whatever item was bound there. So each of them are going to have one of these there. So that's going to look something like that. They need to be properties. Fields do not work. So we've got a name and this complete Boolean. So I can bring those in. Checkbox should work. Checked. Is that what I wanted? I feel like no. I feel like I'm doing this wrong. Oh, ha, I get it. We can't do that. So one of the things, some of these objects, like what I was just running into, this data template can only have a single child. So that's why these grids and stuff become very helpful. There's no way to actually put like a text box or text block and a checkbox in a data template because it doesn't actually have any concept of layout. It doesn't know how you would expect those things to be laid out. And because of that, it doesn't work. So we're going to take this checkbox and do is checked equal to binding checked. And so that should work. I'm saying that a lot because there's a little bit of doubt there. But we're going to do one more binding. That's not right. And we're going to do binding with, shoot, what I call it. We need the task name. So the task name goes there. We're going to do one extra thing, and we're going to set the mode equal to two-way, which means as we actually type into this, we'll actually update the data stored in our object. It won't just go one way. It won't just come into the UI. It will actually go back to that object and actually update that. So when we call this button, it will do that. By default, this will only go back and update the object when you remove selection from this. So when we click off of it. So you can change that if you want. We'll probably just leave that. If you want to change it, there is something that I don't remember. Update source trigger. which is property changed, I think. Yeah. So this should trigger the update every single time we do that. That part may be wrong. It's been a while since I've had to do this again. So some of this stuff kind of take with a grain of salt. It's all totally off the top of my head, but anyway, we want a command here. And so buttons and a few other things have actual commands that you can bind to. So we can actually take this command that we created called the create task command and do a binding of that. And so now all of our data is actually bound to our view models. We don't actually display anything yet, but that's fine. So the last thing I'm going to do just before I do that is actually do some slight editing here, because like I said, this actually doesn't work yet. It sort of works, and I'll show you what I mean. So tasks, we want to do a tasks.add, and I'm going to add just 2 tasks just to show that this actually works. So we're going to do one with a name equal to, say, task 1, and this one will be not complete. And then I want a task 2 that is complete. Let me zoom in a bit there. So what we should see is we should see task 1 with the check mark false, and task 2 should be checked, is what I would expect to have. And so then we can do that data context again, equal to tasks. And so now we expect when I click this start, we should go to our thing, we should start. It should throw an exception. What? Oh, derp tasks equals a new list. There we go. Can't insert into an empty list or into a null object. That doesn't actually work. So now it should work. And I forgot to move the checkbox, so this looks a bit funky, and they're not checked. Okay, so that part I may have gotten the wrong command there, or the wrong thing going there. That's weird. But everything else seems to work-ish. But you'll notice, if I type here and hit add task, nothing happens. And that is actually what's broken about this. Because if I go here to this tasks thing, that's why nothing happens. I had set a parameter here and said if it's equal to this, then we need to do something. We never set that parameter, so that isn't going to work. So we want a command parameter equal to, this is where it gets tricky because I always forget how to do this. Shoot. Source equals, that's not right. There's no way that's right. One sec. I may need to look this up because I always forget how to do this. I always forget how to bind to the current context. Parameter equals this. That wasn't what I wanted. So what I'm trying to do is get this parameter to be equal to the data context so we can actually send that in as an argument to our command. It's not necessarily a good idea to send the entire context of all of your application to every command, but for this, it just works. So that's what we're doing. There's other ways to get around this, but that's sort of the way I'm going about it. It's obviously not doing what I want. So let me go and figure out how to actually do this, because I have to look this up every time anyway. And maybe I think I had to do this with like Immutable or something the last time we did this. So maybe I'll go and, anyway, I'll be right back. with references. Okay, I figured it out, and it was way easier than I thought. That's all you have to do to bind to the current data context is just do a general binding. This is shorthand for just bind to the context of the current object or the current object that's in the scope. So that works. I'm pretty sure I didn't need to look that up. I kind of glanced online and then was like, oh, I should just build it. Oh, yep. Okay. Anyway, we did that. I'm going to fix this grid thing too, because this is bugging me. Grid column 1. There we go. Neat. So now everything should work, which means we should actually be passing things in. So if I do that, we'll get here. And you'll notice if I step over this, our tasks list, that was a weird pronunciation, but our task list now has 3 elements in it, including that new AST thing. But if I continue here, we don't see that, which kind of would seem to defeat the entire purpose of everything we've just done, because now we have to go and manually update our UI. And you'll notice that if I actually played around with this and actually went through the debugging, that applies to everything. So there's a lot of stuff that actually isn't getting updated that should be updated. So like this manually, I can change this and you'll notice it comes back. But if I actually went in code and modified this text box won't change. If I check these in the code behind, those are actually changing, but you'll notice they don't really get set here. There's a lot of broken stuff. And so the reason all of that is happening is because we haven't actually set it up to actually notify the UI when to actually update its stuff. So the way you do that, let's go here. There's 2 ways you do that. First, you don't use a list here. You use what's called an observable collection, which is sort of a smart collection of sorts that will automatically monitor everything here. So that's not how you spell private. So the way this works, if I can actually spell, there we go. Task view model. We'll just call it tasks for now. So this isn't actually fully required. I don't need to really do this, but it will save a bunch of headaches later, which is why I tend to do it. So I'll do it here and then we'll kind of skip ahead, hopefully, if I remember while I'm editing. So how this works is tasks, equals value. So this is just a basic property right now. And this is what these implicitly are doing. So this and this, besides the type, obviously, and the name, are exactly identical. This gets compiled into this behind the scenes. This name might be different, but that's the only thing. You don't really need to know that name because it's private and whatever. So the problem with this is, how do you know when this tasks gets set? You don't have any way to like watch this set value and see when that gets called. And even if you do, you don't actually know when somebody sets this, if they actually changed the value or if they just set it back to the same value. So if something's 1 and you set it to 1, did they change the value or not? And should you go and update the entire UI? So the way this works is you implement what's called iNotify property changed, which is an interface that, okay, that was weird. Thought I had implemented the interface, but I hadn't. There we go. So how this works, there is an event here that the UI will automatically subscribe to this if you inherit from this interface, and you effectively pass in a name. So you pass in tasks is what I would do. So I would say tasks has been updated. And then the UI would say, what elements do I need to update that use this value? It would find those and update those. And that just continues on and on. So the way I usually do this is I have a private void notify property changed. I just sort of implement this. Actually, I think we might be able to steal some stuff from ReSharper. No. Okay, ReSharper usually has a way to do this, but whatever. So the way I'll tend to do this is relatively straightforward. So you give it some sort of string, which will be the name of the property you want to do. And then you do property changed. And then you sort of Elvis operator that into a begin invoke. And you invoke something. What am I doing? IntelliSense Y. There we go. This, and then new property changed event. Okay, by property changed event args. There we go. And you just pass in the name. So went through that a little bit quickly. We want actually just invoke. Begin invoke is different. Don't call begin invoke. All right, cool. So this is going to update everything. And I think we can actually, if you want, if you think that's clearer, you can do something like this. Yeah, you can do that. But I prefer this, which is effectively what this actually reads as is if property changed is not null, then call invoke. If this value is null, like if nothing has bound to it, it will be null, then you don't do anything. So you'll get null pointer exceptions if you don't have this question mark here, just as a warning. So yeah, anyway, that's that. That's all we need to do. And then the simple implementation of this is just to do a notify property changed on the name of tasks. So the reason I use name of here is because when you refactor all of this, it'll actually change. Even if you do it outside of Visual Studio. Visual Studio has improved and actually catches this now. It didn't used to. But if you actually refactor tasks, because what this is actually doing is name of is actually literally the same as typing this. At compile time, it will take out this and actually just swap in a hard-coded string for that value. So there's no advantage there, but it does have the slight advantage of allowing you to refactor your code, and it actually gives you some like easier ways to like navigate and stuff like that. So what I usually do is do a tasks not equal to value. So if the tasks aren't equal to the value, so if they've changed, if the current task object is not equal to what we're trying to set it to, then update it and let everybody know. Otherwise, you don't need to do anything because it's just a no-op anyway. So that kind of allows you to update things. Then you'd have to go and do everything else. So I need to do that here. We don't necessarily need to do our command because our command doesn't have that. But we also need to do our name and our complete at the very least, just so that's persisted. But what we have now should be, oops, build errors. We can't do that. So I was trying to set it to a task or to a list. We need to create a new observable collection like so. So this way it's just automatically implemented. And so behind the scenes, this observable collection actually implements this notify property changed event. And it can actually notify that it's changed even when you like insert or remove or move things, which is nice because now if I call this, I can add it, and you'll see it's actually added there. So I can just keep adding these, and it will just keep going. So that's like a basic task list. I'm not going to go through and add those notify property change things for everything, because we already did it. So if you want to expand on this, go for it. But that's pretty much all you need to do. You can check these. Remember, these this will get reflected back, but everything else won't. Anyway, this is a basic task viewer in WPF. If there's anything else you guys want to see, let me know. This is sort of just something I didn't want to continue with any of the current projects we had while I'm still getting sick. There'll probably be some like random edits because there's parts where I was like coughing and things. But hopefully this is interesting. I know WPF is sort of on its way out. Microsoft has kind of been phasing that out in favor of like Universal Windows Platform and things. But if you're still using Windows 7 or even Windows 10, this stuff still works, and it works pretty well. And there's easy ways to get this into the Universal Windows Platform, and it's fairly universal. So like taking this and bringing this into UWP is actually fairly easy. We could actually do a video on that if you guys are interested in that. It's not hard at all. So yeah, let me know what you thought. And if there's anything else you want me to look at or consider doing in a video, let me know in the comments below. But if you want to see more, definitely subscribe, and I will hopefully be more consistent about videos lately because they have been sparse. So yeah, I hope you guys are doing well, and until next time, see you, Internet.